Hi guys, it's Khaled, doing yet another video. This is going to be my fifth one. Very proud of myself. I hope you're all doing well out there. Uh, so let's get going. The video is entitled Abolish AOC. I'm going to be talking about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, for those who don't know, is a freshman congressperson from the state of New York. The reason that she's relevant to me is because the left has, for several reasons, chosen her to pretty much be an avatar for kind of this left socialist thing, this amorphous body, um, and democratic socialism in general. So she is very much the public face of that. Honestly, like more so from the left's point of view than Bernie Sanders. People desire her to be. She's a much more attractive avatar for them than Bernie Sanders has been. Um, so basically, because of that, my critique here isn't going to be of AOC in the abstract, right? It's within the context of her relationship with the left. Um, like there are 500 some congressional representatives. You could sit and criticize any of them, pick at their flaws, but it's only important in so much that I care about the left project. And I have criticisms of the left project itself. So, understanding the nature of that relationship, why she's been chosen, whether it makes sense given the rational objectives of a left project and what it needs to do in the short term, medium term, and the long term, whether she's a good choice to be that, like, to have that tight of a relationship with the left, that tight of an association. Um, and so, like, that's very informative. There's also kind of like this side context for me that especially like bothers me because we're still in the shadow of the 2020 primary, where I've had a big critique of what happened during the primary from the left with regards to Elizabeth Warren. I think the failure to diagnose who Elizabeth Warren was, ideologically, politically, even just like in terms of basic raw electoral realities, is symptomatic of a deep flaw within the entire left ecosystem. It's much more fundamental than we misjudged Elizabeth Warren. The reasons why she was misjudged are deep and pernicious, and we need to kind of explore them. And there are a lot of parallels between how the left feel about AOC and why the left got so tripped up by Elizabeth Warren. And it's really worth having an honest discussion about those things. So I'll try to inject some of those parallels as I see them. Um, okay, so the way this is going to be broken down, I'm going to talk about how the left feels about AOC and demonstrate it a little bit. After that, I'm going to split this here. I'm going to go through and basically articulate who AOC is as a political actor as I see it. Again, high level as much as possible. Uh, then I'm going to go and explain why the left embraces AOC the way they do, despite what is going to be, from my point of view, a demonstration of her incompatibility with an effective left project. And if you want to like understand some of my thinking about what an effective left project is, as opposed to the bullshit that the left has managed to embrace or has chosen as their general mainstream politics, you can go watch some of my other videos. And then finally, like what does this mean? Um, like the consequences, or not the consequences. Uh, the fact that the left feels this way about AOC is a symptom of what? And what are the long term consequences of that reality? Okay, so let's start with how the left feel about AOC, what their relationship is with her at a high level. Um, Kind of like the best way to describe it is that the left adores AOC. They think that she is sort of like the representative of their movement for themselves. Like they look at her and they see her as the politician of record for them, like in the most mainstream thing possible. Like, of course, there are compromises. She's not perfect. She slips up on this and that, some foreign policy shit. But whatever, but she is the best thing we can get. And looking towards her and making her our representative is actually incredibly useful and important. For like just a few anecdotal examples, like the Democratic Socialists of America, they use cutouts of AOC at their recruiting events when they're out like tabling and asking people to join. They have a cutout of her. When people within DSA talk about like potential politicians to support, they talk about them in terms of relative, like how they compare to AOC. So you hear them saying, oh, that politician is AOC like, or that politician is the next AOC. So, like, that's how they conceptualize of her. And, like, one thing I wanted to do was, like, just grab a few magazine articles and kind of read up in terms of how the left conceptualize of AOC in kind of like the more intellectual portion of the left. And so I thought it would be like a difficult exercise to kind of stitch together a good picture, but it wasn't at all. It's actually kind of crazy what I found out. So I went to Jacobin magazine. I thought I'd start there. Jacobin is the most mainstream, self-professed socialist publication out there. And I just went to search and I typed in AOC, enter. And the results that I found were incredible. So over the past year, so yeah, like about like 13 months or so, these are all the articles that have been written about AOC. And I broke them down into different categories. This what this represents isn't just like a magazine talking about a politician. This is like the propaganda arm of a state leader, like an authoritarian leader. It's just so insane. The language, the actually, you know what? Let me just start reading these, and you'll get the picture. Um, so I broke these up into different categories. The first category is Dear Leader has important plans. AOC's Green New Deal starts strong. Give us AOC's 70% tax rate. AOC's 70% tax plan is just the beginning. AOC knows exactly what the problem is with billionaires like Jeff Bezos, Amazon, and the jobs charade. All these about AOC, all of them about her understanding of politics and her good plans. Second category, the people love Dear Leader. An ecstatic homecoming for AOC. AOC has some advice for parents. AOC is making C-SPAN fun. Third category, Dear Leader is wise. Sorry, AOC is right. AOC is right about aid to Israel. AOC is right. They are concentration camps. AOC is right. She and Joe Biden should not be in the same party. Incredible stuff. Fourth category, Dear Leader's enemies are terrified of Dear Leader. Welcome their hatred. They're not just mad at AOC, they're scared of her. Fifth category, Dear Leader is more than a person. The banality of insurgency. AOC and Ilhan Omar are anchors of a movement. Before AOC, there was the SPD. This is the German SPD. The article is nutso in the comparisons that it's trying to make between AOC and the SPD. And the last one is AOC's endorsement of Bernie Sanders makes sense. Subheading, just like Sanders, she has continually challenged the neoliberal status quo. Okay, this is a freshman congressperson. She's been in there for like a year, a little bit more than a year. In the article, they said that she was staging a coup against the Democratic Party. Continually challenge the neoliberal status quo. Like, what does that fucking even mean? When AOC graduated from college, the first thing that she did was do like a startup that was a combination of WeWork and business consulting, where she would charge basically Hispanic kids or like people who wanted to be entrepreneurs, who wanted to do writing and create literature, $200 a month to give them a fucking desk and give them quote unquote business advice. This is like the most greasy neoliberal bullshit you can fucking imagine. Okay? This is continuously. Not only that, AOC in 2015 wasn't sure if she was going to support Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders. Like, she had to make that decision. She had to think about that. Like, what is this insane Kim Jong Un level, uh, MBS level fucking praise? How is this a serious thing? Well, you might say that, hey, AOC is the second coming of Lenin, right? If this is all justified, she is in socialism incarnate, and she will popularize it and lead us to the promised land. Um, so let's see if this level of insanity is justified. And let's take a look at AOC as a political actor. Um, I want to preface this with the fact that, like I said, this is not a critique of AOC like in absolute terms, uh, in some sort of, against some like absolute measure of goodness or badness of a politician. That thing doesn't matter. Um, this is not about whether she's good or bad, a liar or a truth teller. None of that stuff matters. I think she's probably a person with incredibly good intentions who thinks what she's doing is great, and she thinks that helps the country. She's acting with integrity. Uh, None of those questions are relevant, though. The only thing that's relevant is, given that a meaningful left project that can actually accomplish success, does she help or hinder that project? This is the only thing we need to ask. And so part of that is actually knowing what a meaningful left project would look like. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of just like outline the high points and then ask the question, how does AOC contribute to that effort? So one thing that you would want a political leader or kind of a key figure, key public figure for a socialist left is to provide ideological leadership, to be able to communicate with people in general who either don't comprehend what it is that a left project is trying to do, and steer them in a meaningful direction that embraces the core important ideological pieces. So the problem is that AOC actually doesn't believe in the core, the important pieces of a left project. Her ideological frame is primarily liberal. And what I mean by that is that she views the world through, instead of kind of looking at big structural problems and trying to fix them through massive shifts in the political economy, she looks at them, like, even though she pays lip service to some of those things that I just said, when push comes to shove, when you interrogate AOC, her logic, the gears in her brain, they work through a liberal lens. So, for example, she understands political power as mediated in large part through an identitarian lens. So, if you want to gain political power or advance a political project, what you want to do is you want to break people up into identitarian groups, these loosely formulated social concepts, shove people into those buckets and try to activate them across those identitarian groups. This is a very useful thing for maintaining the status quo, but it's incredibly destructive for a left project that necessitates a solidaristic effort that puts all workers together into a single bucket and focuses their attention on the basic antagonism in society, which is the class antagonism that they have against the people who extract value from their labor, right? The basic formulation um, for any leftist and how they understand the basic antagonism in society. She, on the other hand, reinforces the logic of identity and how it operates politically. She, again, like most liberals, she believes in the power of discourse rather than basic material power. So, what's important is to get people talking about something as opposed to look at what drives that problem and figure out how to move the chess pieces, move power, so that the basic incentives that exist change. One example of that is the Green New Deal, where, like for her, it was like a marketing effort. And she truly believed that this is how change happens. Her metric for success, by her own admission for the Green New Deal, is how much people started talking about the environment as an important priority for them, how much shift that changed. Now, for anybody who has a basic understanding of how climate change occurs and what the sources are, you would understand that this is fundamentally a question of, you know, capitalist incentives, fossil fuel extraction, um, uh, not being able to like nationalize transportation and energy production in a way that it can be optimized for the needs of the public as opposed to needs for maximizing profit, the offshoring of production and having to basically move stuff all around the world in order to create efficiencies, again, to create profit while externalizing the costs of environmental damage. All of these are driven by capitalist incentives, and the machinery to change that isn't going to be people are talking more about the environment. That is nonsense, baby brain stuff. That is the domain of liberalism, but something that AOC wholeheartedly believes in and adopts. Um, so, coupled with that, and kind of an extension of this ideology, like it's hard to talk about ideology in the abstract. So, you kind of talk about it through policy lenses. So, another thing that a political leader needs to do is provide policy leadership. What things are our priorities and what things to sort of commit to and push fully. So, for example, like in terms of using policy as a framework for explaining ideology, um, and actually just as a reference, a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about, um, for me, I wasn't aware of how like basically fucked up how fully liberal AOC was until I watched this interview that she did with this Intercept reporter, Brianna Joy Gray, who's a very smart and sharp person, really understands the issues. Like, I don't even agree with a lot of stuff that Brianna says, but when she talks about like these issues, these ideological issues, these policy issues, she understands both sides um, of the question, right? Whereas AOC is completely incoherent. She actually doesn't even understand the pieces because her entire world is liberal. And when Brianna says basically asks a question that has to do with like the liberal versus the left, she can't escape the orbit of the liberal world and address how leftist thinking basically conflicts with liberalism because her entire understanding of the world lives in this orbit. So, one example from that interview is Brianna asked her about like the conflict that exists between universal programs as opposed to programs of special dispensation. So, programs of special dispensation are like if you start with the identitarian frame, and you can go back to my last video, the left case for throwing marginalized communities under the bus. That video is going to haunt me forever. But uh, you'll get my critique of why it's nuts for a left project to embrace identity politics. And in that instance, I was using the example of race politics, why it breaks completely and doesn't actually help you achieve your objectives, just from a practical point of view. So AOC's response to that was like, yeah, universal programs have a problem. The New Deal was racist. She provides zero context for that. And then she goes on and provides her prescription, which is what we need to do is implement a universal solution uh, through an approach of special dispensations in terms of like prioritizing the rollout of the program. And like the rollout, like the special dispensations, like across um, racial needs. Um, the reality is you can prioritize things. You can basically say that uh, we need to give people who need things the most priority. But the problem with embracing the identitarian frame is that it's politically polarizing and it's counterproductive as a result of that, along with like a whole bunch of other things that actually come into play the moment you start doing that. But the fact that she didn't even understand the question fully. And so she went to one, casting universal programs as being historically racist, as opposed to saying, actually, when the New Deal was implemented, the context that they were implemented in and the political forces that were at play were specific. And here's a description of what they were. Like, this is the 40s and the 50s, and the needs of the political actors, the racist Southern Democrats, in order to push the program through were, X, Y, and Z. And this is how the political conditions have changed or need to be changed so that we can avoid that kind of thing again. She doesn't say that. She just embraces the stupidity associated with universal programs have a tendency to be racist because like Americans have a tendency to be racist. This is a terrible framing, and I'll explain also like why that is as I go along. The other piece is like the other example I want to use is her Medicare for all kind of backtracking. This is a game that Elizabeth Warren played, where I think Elizabeth Warren sincerely wants Medicare for all. Like she thinks it's a great ideal. I think she understands that it's an economically sound approach to providing health insurance, because health insurance at scale is the most efficient way, like economically efficient way of doing it. But like for her, it's not very important whether we get there or not. And because of the political obstacles associated with it, she's willing to abandon it quickly. AOC shares that sentiment. Maybe her commitment to Medicare for all is greater because her constituency and the people who support her have a greater commitment to Medicare for all. But the problem is that from a left point of view, these policies, aside from providing an ideological aside from being a vehicle for explaining an ideological thing, like in the case of a universal policy like Medicare for all, that we're all in it together, solidarity is important, it gives us power, that we can get more by insisting that everybody gets something or gets the same thing, as opposed to allowing us to fight amongst each other. So that's like one purpose that it serves. And because it serves that purpose, it also has like a secondary purpose and a really important purpose, which is movement building, right? We need tools to help politicize people, especially working class people. If we're talking about a left project, we need tools to help get people to coalesce around. They need to be simple policies that materially benefit them, that they can advocate for, and they can be a simple litmus test for the elections, in their elections, who they choose for their representation. But instead of understanding that need, one, the ideological need, and two, the movement building need, AOC, in an interview before actually the primary started, like was asked, hey, if you can't get Medicare for all, would you accept the public option? Says, yeah, I would accept the public option because I don't want to throw my colleagues under the bus if they want to choose to go that way. Um, like that should never, ever, ever be the answer for anybody on the left, right? Because having those policy vehicles are so important and so scarce. Like Medicare for All is so important for us because the tangibility and the simplicity of how you would transform the system for the benefit of everybody, that thinking of it the way that AOC thinks about it as an opening gambit in a negotiation uh, is the way that everybody thinks about it. Okay, not anybody on the left, but just all the progressive liberals inside the Democratic Party. She belongs to them, okay, not us. Which actually casts another thing about AOC, and you can hear that in that interview with Brianna, which is that she thinks of politics first and foremost, even though she pays lip service to the idea of movements and organizing. She thinks that those movements and organizing are about picking smart and well-intentioned people with the right moral rectitude, right, to go in and be given power, and from that point on, that's how everything works. Um, so that ideological frame, again, she shares that fully with Elizabeth Warren. Warren thinks exactly the same way. You can go and listen to an interview that she did with Ryan Grimm, Elizabeth Warren, and she basically expresses the same sentiments. This is one of the biggest, or not the biggest, but this is an important differentiator between Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, is that Bernie Sanders understands the power of who supports him and who can coerce representatives as opposed to representatives themselves. That's like a critical difference between the two. And again, AOC belongs to that camp, not to our camp, where we understand the power of the base and who that base is, in our case, workers. Which brings me to the next point, is that you have to build a working class base. We desperately need that. Okay, and that working class base, because of the problem that we have in this country, which is that over the course of 40 years, we've formalized a political polarization across a cultural axis, where the fundamental differences at the end, the things that we talk about the most, the things that we fight politically about the most, are cultural as opposed to economic. Okay, they're not class differences, right? It's not about the tension that exists between workers and capitalists, but rather the differences that exist between people who are supportive of diversity and people who are not, people who are supportive of patriarchy and people who fight against it, the questions of abortion, the questions of immigration. And so, from that point of view, AOC, or we need a left leader that rejects this polarization as much as possible and insists on changing the dialogue, changing the conversation to the axis of polarization associated with the class tension and this economic disparity that exists in society, this massive, insane economic disparity, and the tools associated with how we organize, how we put people together in meaningful coalitions as workers versus those with material control of resources in the country. And that's a fundamental demand that we need to have of any person that is a representative of democratic socialism, of leftism, of socialism in general, whatever version of that you care about. If you have somebody like AOC who not only doesn't like barely talks about the economic stuff, like again, she only pays lip service to them. she focuses on one aspect of it, which is the only permissible aspect, like genuinely the only permissible aspect. Like this is where her fight is, which is the fight against corporate power, because like everybody understands that corporations are villains. So like her angry shouts and all that stuff, like in the same way that Elizabeth Warren did that, and this is what made her a darling of the left and confused the living shit out of the left. Uh, AOC just does that, and it casts her as a fighter for people. Again, I'm not trying to diminish her other demands, but those just simply saying stuff doesn't fucking mean shit. Okay, when you don't have the power to change anything. And the only way you can change anything is to stop polarizing workers across the cultural axis. Okay, so her saying, I demand that people get better pay, doesn't work when she is a massively polarizing figure across the cultural axis. Those two things are incompatible. She can't do both. I'm sorry, she becomes a partisan actor that is deeply embedded in the Democratic, like for people, like in their imagination in the Democratic Party. She's just a radical liberal, which is exactly what she is. Um, so the left needs to demand that our leaders, our representation, be people who are focused on bread and butter issues, people who are focused on class issues and economic issues. Anything other than that is a deep problem for the left. And which sort of brings me to why she is so insistent on pushing the radical liberalism that she does, stuff where she basically calls the United States a country of racists and white supremacists. She calls for open borders. She's like a big proponent of abolishing ICE, which is sort of a nonsense position. Um, so all this symbolic stuff that just causes um, people to basically it's moral posturing that has no political value, but it has or no political value from the point of view of the left project. It has political value for individuals in the liberal sphere who are trying to attract a base of left liberal professionals, because this is what left liberals professionals love. Okay? And this brings us to the last piece about AOC as a political actor and what the left should think about when they're looking at people, which is what is the political trajectory of an actor. And the way that you can predict that is relatively easy. You say, one, a political actor is trying to maximize their power, and how they choose to gather and amplify their power is the thing that can tell you where they're going to go over time. So in the case of AOC, she has decided that her power lies in embracing identity. So she created like a political action group in order to support women candidates, all of them having stories, identitarian stories, so different backgrounds, diverse backgrounds, and like all the narrative stuff that people in big cities who are professionals, who are kind of like left liberals, love. Okay, that is who she imagines her base is. Her engagement on social media is just playing to that audience because that's where the audience lives. And what she says is trying to get a bigger base of people there. And one thing that's interesting there is like, okay, she has influence. She's trying to be an influencer for sure and a brand builder in that base. And you can say, okay, that's sort of great. Maybe she can use it in our favor. But one thing that's illustrative is that she doesn't, right? So if you say that that's her base, and it's effectively the same base that Elizabeth Warren shared, or that she shared with Elizabeth Warren, AOC should have been able to, if she wanted to, exercise quite a bit of influence in her endorsement of Bernie Sanders. But she didn't, right? She refused to critique Elizabeth Warren. And you can say that's because of the Bernie campaign and their posture about criticism. But she actually refused to even answer the question of why did you choose Bernie over Elizabeth Warren in a rational and meaningful way. She basically waved that question away. The other people in the squad, actually, Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, they both actually answered that question in a much more substantive and meaningful way than AOC did. AOC actually spent a lot of time talking about how great it is that there are so many left female candidates running. There are, of course, no left female candidates running, but for her, leftism is being female because that's the way kind of liberalism conceives of aggrieved groups. There's an essential nature to them, a political nature to them, and for her, just being female and running in the Democratic Party automatically gives you leftist credentials. So, instead of actually going in and using whatever influence she has in order to help the Bernie campaign, she did none of that. What she did was actually demonstrate her power to change campaigns in order to fit the radical liberal left, where she went in and she insisted that abolish ICE be part of the campaign's position. So her demonstration was the ability to move a more materialist campaign over to radical liberal nonsense, as opposed to trying to move radical liberal voters over to a materialist campaign by explaining to them why this is important, why she and Bernie share a project, which they don't. So that's kind of the totality of AOC as a political actor relative to an effective left project. So why does the left, okay, love AOC so much? Why is Jacobin the official state media arm of AOC with amazing pieces like AOC is making C-SPAN fun again? And the reason is that they share a political ideology. So all that stuff that I said about identity politics, discourse versus power, you'll hear something a lot on the left where they say we're moving the Overton window. We're winning the battle of ideas. This is all absolute nonsense, absent actually gaining power that's useful for you. So policy changes can be made. Just simply convincing a small segment of society with media influence to talk a bit more for a short period of time about one topic or another actually does nothing. So, every once in a while during like Occupy, people started talking about income inequality for a little bit, but that went away. Green New Deal gets rolled out, people talk about the environment for a little bit, but then that goes away. It's just unless you have a power base that actually moves you in a certain direction, moving the Overton window and winning the battle of ideas is all nonsense bullshit that is meant to make people feel better. But the left, because they embrace what I call vision board politics, which is like if enough people express the right sentiments and think that they want the right things, then somehow it'll manifest into the world. Because they actually believe this nonsense, then we get stuff like AOC and we get a left that actually shares that sentiment with her and they see her as winning. Also, they share identity politics with her. I broke that down in the last video, and that's a deep problem. And the other thing that they share is a target audience. So the same people that AOC is trying to build her power from, these left liberal professionals, people with like money to spend, they are on social media, they have time to invest in politics and care about already. Uh, those are the same people that the left is trying to recruit into their project. Join DSA, buy subscriptions for their magazines, buy copies of their books. Um, the very first video that I did, the exit ramp, was fundamentally a critique of the mentality underlying that approach and why that's absolutely disastrous in the long term. Um, so, like, that's why the left embraces AOC. Um, and in the end, what that means is that, this is another symptom of the left being, what I described as a non-effective left. It's not a materialist left. It's not a left that's serious about winning because they have no metrics of success. So, like this exercise of going through and saying, this is what we need out of a leader because these are our goals and this is what a leader needs to do for us. The fact that they've never done that exercise with somebody like AOC, they couldn't do it with somebody like Warren, basically means that AOC, because of the basic incentives, the power forces that are applied to her, she's going to drift in a certain direction, and the left has no power to exert over AOC. Okay? The only thing they can do is keep saying she's great and we love her and she's a socialist, and then they have to start apologizing or excusing the things that she does. Like for example, she fucked up on some foreign policy thing. Jacobin writes in articles like, "Hey, we think that she will do better later." And the fact is, it's no big deal that she messed up on some foreign policy stuff as a freshman in Congress. But the fact is, this is going to be a trend because you have to understand power and incentives that people have in their life. But the left, that's not their optimization. Their optimization is to appeal to the professional managerial class and bring them on board. And like honestly, the long-term consequences of that, like I said in the exit ramp, is that there is no way out of this. We simply don't have the people who are trained to reject this false religion of liberal politics, radical liberal politics, see it for what it is, as sort of a false anti-hegemonic politics. They feel in their gut because they all went to graduate programs and they were all trained in the language of where like all this radical nonsense to them, to their ears and in their hearts sounds like it is the heart of fighting against capital. They can't distinguish between the two, and AOC just kind of tickles that part of their brain. They're like, yes, she's a leftist. This makes sense to me. This is we have a whole generation. We have 40 years of neoliberals successfully training people to think that the bullshit politics that they do is actually radical. So I don't know the way out of this. So when I say abolish AOC, it's like, AOC is fine, but as long as the left views her as an avatar and a representative, you can diagnose the left as being fucked, as having no hope. Not they won't. They're not interested in pursuing power. They're not interested in building a working class coalition that rejects the cultural polarization, and they're primarily interested in convincing their friends from college to come join them in DSA adventures. I'm sorry, but this is the truth and it sucks. So hopefully one day AOC will be treated as just the basic progressive liberal that she is, but I'm not holding my breath. Anyways, thank you, and I'll see you next time, I guess. Bye.